Hello and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Nick Kanoki, Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and we are excited today to have a conversation with Deke Smith. But before we get to Deke, we just want to make sure we thank our patron members as Jacobs, Definitive Logic, Onuma, ABS Quality Evaluations, and CGI, as well as all our organizational members. And if you're out there wondering how our organizations could work together, please reach out because we would love to partner with you. And upcoming events, we have on March 20th, Value and Benefits from Asset Management webinar series continuation program with Daniel Platz and Linda Newton. And Daniel has been a key player in ALN events recently, and we're very excited to see him present again. Mike, do you want to say any more about that?
Yes, the Australian Asset Management Council, who co-facilitates values and benefits from asset management with us, was very happy to have a special program that is focused only on the United Nations. It's a very different type of program than we usually have with value and benefits. It's at a strange time. It's 5 p.m. Eastern because it's always 8 o'clock a.m. in Australia. And since they provide sometimes more than 300 registrants, that's fine. This is really a program for Australia. I wish the US would respond the same way the Australians do, but it's not. And so they'll be talking about the places where they have brought the United Nations Handbook on asset management for sustainable infrastructure and talk about conditions that are surprisingly similar to first world situations. Everybody needs to know what assets they have. They need to have a system for managing them and communicating with people. So it's always amazing how similar any asset management situation is. So thanks, Nick, for letting me talk a little bit extra about that. And
Of course.
please join us for the conversations with Nick, or with Deke. But before I get into that, I've got some just really continuing to be exciting 2024 news. So last week, Rich Culbertson and I went to Senator Casey's office, Pennsylvania senator, and they're really interested in what Rich is doing with gas utilities and how he is helping point out that gas utilities are not meeting federal regulations for reporting on their assets before they get more money. This is a systemic issue across all utilities across the US, and Senator Casey's legislative staff was interested in mining Rich's brain on how it is that utilities are not meeting regulations and what can be done to encourage them to improve their asset management so that we can stop some of these fires that are getting started from bad transmitters and poor utility asset management. That's exciting. And then just this week, 2 Asset Leadership Network members exhibited at the National Facility Management Technology Conference in Baltimore, Onuma Inc. and CDV Systems, which has Collectus, presented together. And Deke Smith is the person who brought Kimon and Cyril together. And it's the network in the way it's supposed to work. And Deke, I'm happy to report that with me there and the 2 members talking together about how their work is based on collaboration, that not one company can do it all, and that the Asset Leadership Network has this organization of like-minded people who want to work in these collaborative manners to achieve mission success for the owner organizations, was really well received. And I think ALN members are going to be getting work out of this conference. And it's a conference that you've been to in the past, Deke. And so I wanted you to be here today because I saw that direct connection, but also because Jack Kelly did such a good job last week of launching the revised National Asset Leadership Strategy by the ALN that we're going to be doing this year, and saying how it needs to bring together the leaders of many different organizations, movements, even if you want to say it that way, because they all fit together. Deke has been the father of the US CAD standard, he is the father of the US BIM standard, and now he is shepherding a total cost of ownership standard. And total cost of ownership goes hand in glove, step by step with asset management. I don't know which side of the coin it is, but they're just totally together.
Same coin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we can't go into how did you get where you're at in your asset management journey, because that would be not just this half hour, but a few more. Can you tell us what brought you to the concept of total cost of ownership?
You know, I've been thinking about total cost of ownership, and maybe under some different names even. Back in I think I have some presentations that go back to the 80s.
I'm sure you do.
And we're talking about that. I had some time doing value engineering and life cycle costing back in the early 80s. I guess it was about 79, 80. And that kind of got me thinking about a lot of these things that, you know, when we talk about assets, and of course, one of the things I think that is important is had some time with the Department of Defense and worked for Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Installations and Environment, where we managed 570,000 assets, which is actually the largest property holder in the world.
Yeah. When you say assets, you mean discrete properties,
yes,
not personal not buildings.
No, not your cell phones.
Basically,
like these are buildings and stuff like that. So
the campuses, basically.
Well, and then they're all arranged on installations and things like that, which that's where I've kind of also been involved with and got involved with APPA, because APPA represents a lot of the universities. The universities have large portfolios, which is very similar to an installation, a military installation. And so that's kind of how all these things started coming together. And then when APPA was ready to do their TCO standard, that's when Anna Thiemer actually and Doug Christensen and myself were co-chairs of the of developing the national or the total cost of ownership standard, and two-part standard. And unfortunately, Doug passed away before we could finish part two. But we had pretty much all the notes that we needed, and so we were able to finish it up pretty well, I think. And it's a really good tool that I think actually almost will it'll go hand in glove with 55,000. And like I was asking earlier, I think, you know, is that going to be, you know, 55,012 or 50 or some, you know, some other number there that really kind of shows how it all fits together. And I think the big thing about, you know, my probably number one takeaway is that we're really trying to move everybody from first cost to total cost. You know, just don't look at what it's going to cost. And that's what most everything, if you're looking at just the design and construction side of things, everything's looking at first cost. But it's really much more important that you look at that longer term picture. And I think that things like LCCA are part of TCO, but
so life cycle cost analysis.
Yeah, life cycle cost analysis, and that's looking at. I think there's one of the things after we finished the standard, both parts of the standard. With part one was the principles. There's 13 principles, and we'll talk about that as we go. But the second part was implementation, and how do you actually implement all these things? After doing all that, I looked at it and says, well, have we really ever said why we're doing TCO? So as I said to Mike earlier, I quickly came up with a list of about 50 items as why we should be doing TCO. And then I said, okay, you know, 50 items, you can't really get your hands around that. So I, you know, started bubbling those down and boiling those down and getting down to the point where I think there's really at least there's probably lots of different ways we can look at it, but there's probably 4 different areas. And one is, and they're all really oriented towards decision making. And there's a lot of decision making with asset management too. And we'll, again, I'll get back to the 13 principles and I'll show you how that relates. But I think there's kind of current year decision making, that you're trying to make a decision today about something, whether it's during design or whether it's just your operations of your facilities, trying to decide, make a product selection between one item or another. And I think it's important for like designers to be looking at TCO, because now the decisions you make in design, are they going to last with that facility for its life? But then every time you renew a product in that facility, you should also look at your TCO, because that renewal, is it going to have a better energy rating, or is it going to have, be able to, last longer than the first one did, or whatever. And you've got to be able to keep track of those kind of things in order to be able to do that. So you're looking at maintenance decisions. What happens if I do preventive maintenance? What happens if I delay maintenance? What are the impacts? And of course, you never get enough money to do your, the work. So what's happening if you defer that maintenance? What are the impacts going to be? And trying to analyze that, say, okay, if you don't replace the roof, then you're also going to have to replace the roof deck, and you're going to have to maybe, replace have some damage inside the facility and things like that. Then the second group is kind of the next year to 5 years out. And I found like 20 different reasons for doing that. And they're talking about resource leveling and allocation. So, if you have a campus, or if you have a large portfolio, you don't want everything to come due at the same time. You don't want all the roofs to come due at the same time, or all the major cost things. So if you can go and spread them out a little bit, then you can level your budgeting from one year to the next. And of course, with the TCO, looking over the next 25 years, you can decide just, how much money is going to be required to be able to do that. Not only how much money, but also what kind of full-time equivalent, or FTEs, you need to be able to run your organization. That's one of the things that Doug Christensen did he worked at Brigham Young University. And that's one of the things they did. The board of directors wouldn't approve a new facility until they had a TCO study to be able, and they decide whether or not they had enough resources to be able to operate all the rest of their facilities. And if they didn't, either they'd hire new, or they'd get rid of a facility, and say, okay, that facility is going to be at end of life. And then the next category is the, like say, long-term decision making, say 5 to 25 years. And I found like 14 different things to do that. Same, get into, more agile long-term planning, which is another committee. Actually, there's a CFAR program through, and I can't remember what CFAR stands for. I'm sorry, through APPA, that we're looking at how do we replace master planning with something that's more agile, because we have the data to make these decisions more quickly now. And historically, a master plan was put together, and then 5 years later, you did another master plan. And that's actually where Kimon and I met. We were doing master plans for Hawaii, I think it was, and so that's another long story I can't tell right now. But looking at what structures you want to retire, which one, and planning for that, and then making sure that you don't do renewals on facilities that are getting ready to be retired and all that. And in the end, the last group of them were really in making those end of life decisions. What kind of residual value does a facility have? How do you get any remaining useful life out of it? And then making things like run to failure decisions on different pieces of equipment and stuff like that. So overall, I think the bottom line with TCO is really that it's 5 different parts. It's looking at the initial cost, obviously, but also looking at the cost of operations and maintenance, the cost of utilities, and of course those both occur on an annual basis. And then you look at renewals, and those occur periodically, but they occur at different times, and it's very predictable. it always kind of upsets me when somebody says, oh, we're surprised that we have to replace the roof or something like that. Well, I could have told you 25 years ago that you're going to have to replace the roof. You know,
So now you're getting to the real issues,
yeah,
the human factor.
that's right. Yeah, it is. It is. And then of course, like I say, at the end of life is, what's the value and what costs you might have, and it's end of functional life. That's, I mean, obviously, and every facility is different. I mean, you've got landmark facilities that are going to be around forever. And I know, my good friend Mike Tardif, was doing projects with in DC where they were renovating some of the major landmarks and having to keep the facilities open every day while they were replacing the HVAC system. So they, replace sections at night, and they do a lot of modeling and visualization and everything like that. So I think that the key element here is that, and this is where I think that we kind of go hand in glove with the asset leadership, is that these 13 principles, there's 4 foundational principles, and that is managed asset, asset inventory. So in managed asset, you're kind of identifying what are you going to manage? What assets are you going to manage? You don't manage flagpoles necessarily, but you do manage, most of your other facilities, things like that. So you've got to have an inventory of all that. Then you've got to be able to have classification. How do you sort those? And especially, like you say with GSA or DOD or something like that. And any really a campus is going to have dormitories. They're going to have laboratories. They're going to have, and they're all treated differently. They all have different risk tolerances as far as how critical they are, and so and especially if you're going into like Coast Guard or there's a lot of work been done with that as far as identifying some critical facilities and maintaining all those. Then you get into asset costing. Okay, that's a unique TCO piece that doesn't necessarily it isn't as much as part of asset management, but I'll get into that a little bit more as we go. Then there's asset inspection, which is definitely part of your asset management. Asset performance, how are things performing? Are they? And this goes back into even commissioning a facility and being able to determine how the system was operating when it was commissioned, and then how is it operating now, and at what time do you want to replace things and those kind of things. Then you get into, now you start getting into the other big piece of it is integrity. And you're getting into data verification, making sure that the data is accurate and all. Being able to share that information with others.
Safely.
Well, exactly. And that's, there's cybersecurity issues, all kind of things like that. And who has access to what information?
Right.
Excuse me.
Well,
then there's asset reporting, again, reporting out to everybody. And then all the rest of them, the last 3 of the principles are related to decision making, actual asset decisions, asset annual funding, which of course, putting together the budgets and everything like that, and then having a comprehensive plan for all your assets. So those were the 13 principles. 10 of them are really asset management principles.
mm-hmm.
And I believe that probably as you're going through and doing your asset management, if you're doing it right, you're probably collecting 80 to 90% of the data that you need to be able to do TCO.
And you're establishing the governance for effective TCO.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And that's the, I think that's the biggest piece is being able to have good business processes in place, so you can manage the information and be able to access the information. I think that's one of the biggest problems we have likely is, and this is, I'm facility architect as well as an IT architect, and I worked on the business enterprise architecture. I was the thread lead for installations and environment. and one of 5 thread leads for that, and that was a $1 billion project or whatever for IT architecture. And one of the things that we did was try to find out who are the authoritative sources for data, and then who are the people that need the data and can use the data, and connecting those.
So in addition to all those roles, you are an architect. As a matter of fact, you're a fellow in the American Institute of Architects. So it was great to be there when you received that in Boston's Trinity Church.
Yeah, that was a few years ago.
I want to point out that Kimono Numa is an architect. Cyril Verlay is an architect. Thomas Jefferson was an architect. I don't think that it's a coincidence. It takes an architectural art of problem-solving mind to address these big picture issues. And there was nothing bigger picture than establishing the United States and setting up a structure that, despite all the challenges, has held up. And now we're talking about things that can improve the United States if adopted. And the great thing about having you involved in this is you've been involved in establishing the CAD standard, the BIM standard. You're used to bringing things to a national level. And I think if we
Did we rehearse this? What a great segue.
if we combine forces with you and other other associations that are interested in these principles, then we can elevate this to action. And that's why I was excited to talk about the warm reception we're having on Capitol Hill. And that's encouraging.
Let me share something. This is something I've been working on for a while, and I was hoping it was going to come up today, because the first item in the nows, your report,
yes, National Asset Leadership Strategy, yes,
right, is national goals. And so let me see if I can pull this up. This is something that I've been looking at for a while. Hopefully, there we go.
Okay.
And looking at how do we, reduce delivery time, reduce total cost, reduce or increase recycling and reduce landfill, reduce carbon footprint, and increase net zero energy focus. And I've just got some percentages along there on the second line. And then in order to do that, and this was kind of taken from some work that was being done in the UK a few years back. And what I really felt that there was, in talking to those folks, I thought the concept was great. What they were missing was these 4 items at the, or 3 of the items anyway, at the bottom. And that is identifying what metrics everybody's going to use to be able to count these, and what measurement tools are we going to be able to use to count those. And so we can show progress. And then establishing a time frame, when is it going to be done by? When are we going to meet those percentages? And then number one thing is really establish a baseline. Where are we now? Where are we now? So we can, and then get everybody. And that's going to not be an easy task to get everybody to agree that, where are we as how long does it take to deliver a facility or something like that. And then as you go, and this is one thing that they did do a pretty good job of, was publishing the results. They did come out with some information showing how they had actually made some great progress, but it was unfounded. There wasn't enough foundation to get people to really kind of jump onto it. And so I think that if we can come up with something like that, and it doesn't have to be these necessarily, but something like that, to be able to kind of pull things together, and be able to have some common goals. As one of the other things when I was at National Institute of Building Sciences, we identified some 250 individual organizations that are involved in the construction process. Things like the big ones, AIA, CSI, and ALN and things like that, but also little tiny, things about cabinet manufacturing, or, rug manufacturers or something like that. And the thing is, each one of those, represents a constituency, and each one has some goals, and they're probably not, they're goals that are really supporting their membership. But the problem is that there's no national focus. What are we all trying to achieve? And if you look at it from an owner's point of view, which is, when you're talking to the congressman and things like that, or a senator,
Mhm.
that's what they're the owners, and that's who a lot of these, who we really need to be able to be more conversant with, I guess. Because they don't, they see, sadly, they see the whole design and construction effort as a necessary evil.
Yeah.
Because once they conceive that they want to have a facility constructed, it's delayed gratification until they actually get it. So no matter
Mhm.
how fast we work, it's still not going to be fast enough. And I think that's, those are the kind of things that we have to just say, hey, are we being as efficient as we can? And right now we know we're not as efficient as we can be by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, those are human issues that I'm really glad you brought up. And just so everybody knows, we're about to approach the bottom of the hour, and we typically end at a half hour, but I promise you this is not going to end at the bottom of the hour. We're just going to keep going with this one because now we're kind of turning it into a working discussion. And I think that the United Nations gives us an opportunity to leverage bringing together those associations nation by nation. And we are talking with the United Nations about having an event at the United Nations headquarters. Now, we couldn't have all of the meetings there, but it's possible we have one day there, and then maybe we have national breakouts at different federal agencies that donate meeting space for different countries to come together and talk about how are they bringing these things together under one umbrella so that there isn't fighting over the leadership. Well, bad word to use. But, it's 13, 10 of the 13 things are total cost of ownership. So is it asset management or it doesn't matter? Look at them. They are the same. If you do one and link to the other, you're checking the boxes on both of these lists. And really what we want to do is align as many of these lists, principal lists together and show that cabinet makers are the same as the steel workers.
They have a piece. They have a piece of the pie. That's absolutely.
And yeah, so yeah. Can you talk a little bit about some of the national initiatives that you were working on that were facing similar challenges, but finally were overcome?
Well,
For example, I know the CAD standard, when
right.
computer-aided design first came out, the business model for software companies was to keep the information inside their software and not make it possible to go out, so that if you sold to an organization, they had to keep coming to you forever. And you led the group that said, hey, we're the federal government. We don't want to be imprisoned in your software.
Well, yeah, that was, and we did that with some big contracts and stuff like that. That kind of mandated that it be separated like that. But I think the big difference with CAD was we were automating an existing process, drafting. And looking back on it now, that was pretty easy, all in all. And I'll tell you, we had a lot of negative, there was a lot of negative energy out there as to why we shouldn't be doing CAD, just like everything else we try to do in future. So, but then as we got into BIM.
So you mean the owners of the companies that are serving facility owners were fighting the change to computer technology?
Oh yeah.
There was a resistance to improving processes with current human tools.
Why would
Again,
anybody want everybody to have a computer?
again, another natural human issue. I'm beating this drum
I know.
because it's not the tools, it's not the processes, it's our psychology, it's our
It
human
is.
behavior.
It is, and it just takes a while to overcome and I think it's, it's like Peter saying he's, people don't want to be changed. People want to change, but they don't want to be changed. So if they finally get to the point of wanting to, to change, and that's kind of what you have to get them thinking, is that it's their idea to change it. But what I was going to say is that as we got into to BIM, that's one of the reasons why I got started more in and put a little more energy into TCO, because I think TCO can provide the reasons for doing BIM. What are the benefits? The other, some of the other frustrations, of course, that I have is that we have to get the information to flow a lot better. And we shouldn't create a BIM for design and then create one for construction and then create, a digital twin after all that from scratch. All the information needs to flow. And I think that's where we get back into the asset management part of it, is that the assets are going to be in existence for the life of the facility. And so, let's treat them as as complete entities. They were designed, they were constructed, they have renewals, they have, and eventually they'll be torn down or they'll be repurposed or something like that, or sold to somebody else. And of course, it's not for everybody. It's those people that have larger portfolios are going to be the ones that are the most interested first. The person that goes out and builds one facility every 20 years, probably isn't going to be as understanding of what all this means. I say that, but at the same time, and we were talking about it earlier, it can be, it's very scalable. I'm also involved in my homeowners association, and we do a reserve study every 5 years to, see and project for 25 years what kind of maintenance and what kind of renewals we're going to have. And so that we build up to have a reserve in place, money that we need to be able to do those modifications. And that process is pretty much the same thing you would do on your assets, is being able to, just say what, project what, what maintenance is going to have to be done, what preventive maintenance is going to be done that's going to help prolong the life of an asset, of a system in that asset. So I think, you start at the small parts and you add them all up and we've got a chart someplace, I didn't have it in this deck, but where we started, from the system level all the way up to the world level. And I'm sure you probably remember that slide.
Yeah.
We used that a long time.
The United Nations will be interested. The United Nations will be interested in that.
Well, that's right.
So,
yeah.
So,
yeah, I think that's, and the other thing along those lines, we've been involved with Building Smart International, and I think they're up to 20 plus chapters now, probably maybe even 25 chapters. And that's, I mean, it's starting to gain some, again, that's something that's, taken a long time to gain some traction. And it's addressing a small part of this bigger asset management issue.
so Building Smart International is the group of building industries professionals who volunteer their time to create standards to allow information from all categories of building to be shared through a building information model.
Okay. Yep. The IFCs, international standards. They have several international standards that are working with to be able to do that. And again, different people have taken on that on that capability. Not everybody, but certainly it's well worth looking at for a certain group of these people that are trying to produce these assets. and manage and operate these different assets. But like I say, I think the big thing is just the number one is just get us off of that first cost focus and look at the bigger picture. And I think that's the mindset that has to change as much as anything.
And we now have the tools
Yeah.
to help people understand that in ways that were not possible as efficiently with CAD or even with hand drawing. The visualization capabilities of building information models are hugely important to be able to show, what if that piece of steel doesn't show up on time? Then everything that hangs off of it gets delayed and this project's messed up. So the steel people really understand how the pressure's on them and they've got to deliver.
Well, and this is where, we start dealing with big data and we start dealing with AI and being able to manage all that information. And be able to, and we have, like you say, we have the tools now to do it. We haven't necessarily fully applied them yet. But I think that's coming pretty quickly. And so those, and that's where, we have these vast amounts of data that are in our possession, whether it be accounting, whether it be training, personnel, work orders, ERPs, everything that's out there. None of it's connected. It's all independent data sets. And so there's no way to, and if you order something, almost no data is not available electronically at some point in its life, so,
right.
And so I think that if you place an order, that company that you're buying it from is doing everything on their side electronically. And then, incorporating that information, that's things where like Kobe and those kind of things come into play too. That's one of the reasons why I like Kobe, is because
construction, operations, building information exchange. Yes.
Yeah, Dr. Bill East put that together, and it's a great concept. It kind of is a parallel that really kind of carries the data for the BIM, if you will.
Right.
And then also provides that information. You don't have to have a BIM even, but it carries the information you need to be able to operate and maintain your facility, so that you have the information you need on day one to be able to understand what warranties you have, what maintenance, what spare parts you need, all these kind of things. And again, that's, it kind of ties in with all these things, and it's a little closer connection to the other data and tying those things together. I think, when people procure things in an organization, in the acquisition group and the accounting group and all those, they all should be tied together too. And so that's what happens with TCO, is it's not just the beginning and the costing, but it's how that relates to all the assets and all. And so again, that information is in your possession. You just haven't necessarily applied it to TCO. And I think that's the key, is being able to do that.
Okay, I've put up links to references to articles and the part 1 and just APPA in general. I should say that APPA started out as an association for college facility managers, and they realized that the title was inappropriate, so they just got rid of all the words and just kept APPA, and it doesn't mean anything right now because it's far beyond just university planners.
Well, like I say, I became interested at first with DoD and looking at the relationship of campuses to installations, and that's kind of some of the early things we wanted to. I don't know if you remember installation life cycle management. Do you remember that one?
No, but
that was
let's get back to, you said that CAD was easy, but you didn't talk about what got the CAD standard over the hill. And then I was gonna over the hump. It's not over the hill. What was it that
it was
actually
getting policy in place? It was getting policy in place, and what happened was that once the Army, Navy, and Air Force had policy in place that they were going to design their facilities with CAD, with the national CAD standard. You know, I was in Norfolk, I think, when we first started some of this stuff, and we had 400 different A&E firms that we were working with to do our designs for our facilities. I was with Naval Facilities, and you know, so if those were 400 firms that wanted to do business with the federal government. So if they wanted to do business with the federal government, they had to use the national CAD standard. So once they implemented the national CAD standard in their offices, then that kind of spilled over into their private sector work too, because it was a, you know, layering guidelines. It was all things that, you know, it worked with the different software packages and things like that. It worked with Bentley, it worked with Autodesk, it worked with, you know, all of them. And so I think that that's kind of where, because of that, then it just spread, you know, through everything very quickly. We haven't gotten that same traction with the BIM standard yet. And I think that's primarily because it's hugely more complex.
Yeah.
You know, it's not automating an existing process, it's creating new processes.
But you said something earlier that is really the heart of the matter. It's about the business process model. Because if you don't have instructions on why you want these measurements, why these costs are important, what is the organization's mission, who are the stakeholders, if you don't have that business process model in place, then none of the rest of this can talk. And that's another reason why it's good that architects are driving some of this, because of the structural and the artistic approach to that structuring of the data information is part of architectural training.
Yeah, one of the things that was, I was working for Army Research Lab for a while as the deputy CIO, and there was a huge, it was like, at that point, it was like 13th largest computing center in the world or something like that. One of the reasons there was because most of their downtime was related to infrastructure issues. And so that's why they decided to have an architect on staff, which was kind of, I was the only architect that I think's probably ever been on the staff at Army Research. And but what was interesting, we set up an operations center, and we managed, and actually we did a TCO study using Gartner on the IT side. And again, those same principles hold true with what we're trying to do with all facilities. And you know, sadly, or probably even a good thing, is that the IT industry has a pretty good handle on TCO. And we can really borrow from them as far as what they've been able to accomplish. So we're not really even, you know, inventing anything new here.
No.
It's just applying some of the really basic foundational concepts that make a lot of sense. I think one of the other things I always want to mention is when we talk about information flow and stuff like that, and that's metadata. That's another thing that I don't think we do real well at. Because, excuse me, what we want to do is be able to know who put the information in, why they put it in, and you know what level of sensitivity it might have, all kinds of information about a data element, so that you know what it is, and especially in the costing world. You know, somebody said we do 300 estimates on a facility, and that's because you know, especially the government, you know, the government does an estimate, and then each one of the contractors that's bidding on the project does an estimate, and each one of the subs that works on that project does an estimate. And, you know, and they're all starting from a blank sheet of paper pretty much. And they do that for each phase of the project. And then they do it during construction, and then any change orders that happen, they do more. And so you've got estimates on top of estimates, and every number starts out from scratch. You know, you end up calling a supplier saying, you know, I need a price for a door or something like that. And I remember one time I was putting together a government estimate for a facility up in Iceland. And I said, I need prices for some doors. He said, well, I can get to you next week or something like that. And I said, well, I need 400 of them. He said, well, I can help you right now. And so he said, but I have to tell you, you're like the 10th person that's called about this today. So that's waste, having
Yeah.
something like that over and over again. And that's where you kind of look at the UK system where they do the quantity surveys. There's some advantages of doing it that way, that everybody agrees up front what the quantities are.
Mhm.
Everybody doesn't have to do a quantity takeoff and things like that. That's, so there's some things that, again, going back to the UN kind of approach, there's things we can learn from some of the other folks out there.
Mhm.
China has a great rail system, and they've submitted for a lot of awards through Building Smart International, and
Mhm.
they've done some incredibly interesting things and using IFCs and things like that, and so using that international standard from Building Smart. So I think there's again, we just have to kind of piece together some of the parts out there, and we can come up
Well,
with a solution.
never wanting to waste a good crisis, I think AI gives us that opportunity.
Yeah,
And one of
yeah,
the things that I like about what Kimon is bringing to the Asset Leadership Network is the AI storms,
yeah,
showing how
yeah,
artificial intelligence can actually be used in a beneficial way right now. Not saying that, fire can't burn the building down in addition to cook our meals, but let's use fire in the proper way to our advantage. And so we're going to be planning another AI brainstorm. It might be port storm, it might be a federal storm, whatever. But if we could involve TCO, uh, APPA TCO members, then the way of putting the cost information into artificial intelligence could really get a lot of people interested in TCO, following the principles
yeah.
and what you've got set up. So I'll
Well,
definitely keep you in mind.
and I can remember when Kimon did his BIM storm for New Orleans, and brought all this information together and showed it to the counties or the city and things like that. And they said, "Where did you get all this information?" He said, "It's all out there. I just brought it together and made it so it's usable to you, you know." And they could go and analyze, how many facilities were going to be underwater and how far underwater and all those kind of things. And it was, and it was all data that existed before. They didn't have to go out and gather it for it. And that's where I think we're generating information at such an incredible rate now. And so we've just got to be able to tap into it. And that's where AI can help us.
Yes.
AI is a double-edged sword. There's no question about it. So we got to be able to manage it before it manages us.
All right. So bringing up New Orleans, I love that this little story that when FEMA proved inadequate of dealing with the Katrina disaster, Admiral ALN Th
Yep.
Allen from the
Yep.
Coast Guard was brought
Okay.
in,
Yep.
and he used principles that Jack Dempsey and Kimono Numa had brought to the Coast Guard
Sure.
in that, and he later got a Presidential Medal of Honor for
Yep.
his work in that, using the
Yep.
practices and ideas that were brought forth from working with them. And yeah, that was a
It's
great illustration.
Yeah, no, it is. And that's, I mean, again, it takes thousands of people to make all this work.
Yeah.
And I appreciate all your efforts and your
Oh,
continuing
thank you.
efforts in trying to get the word out, and we just keep plugging away at it, and hopefully things will start connecting as the time goes.
We've got to give a shout out to Scott Smith. He's at Skocum now, and he says hi to you.
Hey, Scott, and I think I said my son's name is Scott Smith, so every time I see his name, wait, it's my son. But he's a coach at the University of Buffalo.
So thank you, Deke, for joining
pleasure.
us. We covered a lot of important ground, and look forward to working with you to figure out how to bring these organizations together to achieve our single mission of helping the world not burn up from our waste.
Well, I think
Basically.
we're close. I think we're close to, like I say, there's a lot of synergy there already. So I think it's just going to be a fairly easy next step.
Okay, so Scott's recommending base operating support contract.
Right.
Figure out how to get in and through there.
Yeah, I agree.
Get a big contract that way.
Yeah. Well, and
All
I
right.
do think that, the government is, or DoD is one place that there's, again, a tremendous opportunity. The problem there almost is there are too many. So you've got to almost deal with an installation and demonstrate it there. But you can, any one of the bases you could go to and demonstrate the capability and then build from there. So, yeah.
Excellent.
Great
All right.
stuff.
Well, thank you, Deke, and thanks
Thank
to
you.
all the audience members, and we'll see you again next week.
All right. Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye.